creative.
I'm gearing up to switch over to a brand new camera system. So what better time than to take a look back at the Micro Four Thirds gear that I've been using for the past 6 years. I want to share a few thoughts, a few stories, do some micro reviews. We'll have a couple laughs, maybe shed a few tears. This is a love letter to Micro Four Thirds from Super Creative. The Micro Four Thirds system, which I will henceforth refer to as MFT, has treated me well. When I quit my job back in 2015 to start Super Creative, I needed a camera that could do photo and video equally well. And the GH4, which was groundbreaking at the time, it fit the bill. And by bill I mean my tiny budget. I was worried that the sensor, only 1/4 the size of a full-frame camera, wouldn't be able to put out professional results. But those fears were quickly dispelled as I got into the system. Now, some people might tell you that this sensor is a little too clinical, but as someone who is a staff filmmaker and photographer at a hospital and who shoots surgeries on a routine basis, I would say it's, what's that word? Perfect. I use my MFT cameras to do photo work for magazines. I did videos for some pretty big brands. Some of them, maybe you've even heard of them. Some small brands that you haven't. I did mountains of work in tons of different genres and industries that I never could have anticipated. I even became a Panasonic Lumix brand ambassador at one point, and I'll never forget the phone call because I had prepared 3 pages of notes of all these things I was going to say to try to impress them to make me an ambassador. And on the phone, he goes, "Rob, you want to be a Panasonic brand ambassador?" And I said, "I would love to." And he goes, "Well, I looked at your Instagram and you're in." And that was it. And that was really the beginning of doing some huge things with a tiny camera. So speaking of big things, I went on to shoot 100 images for a brand new $650 million children's hospital, including a 5-foot light box in the lobby. Now these are just some of the digital images because I don't want to go shoot the actual building right now because it's COVID and it's a children's hospital and that would be moronic. Here's a fun one. No, I didn't go back in time and shoot sliding doors with Gwyneth Paltrow, but I did meet up with writer-director Peter Howitt to shoot some material for the feature-length making-of documentary that's included on this collector's edition Blu-ray disc by Shout Selects. So I think that was pretty cool, probably the closest any of my Micro Four Thirds footage will ever get to a major Hollywood release. Now the last thing I want to highlight that I did with the Micro Four Thirds system is a documentary series. And it's called House Call. It's a healthcare related show about caregivers. We went on to win a bunch of international awards. So Micro Four Thirds boxes way above its weight and it should not be underestimated. Now I thought we'd take a minute and just go over a bunch of my favorite gear that I've used over the years. I want to give some recommendations, some tips, some stories. I'll show you some photos, some video clips as we roll through each one. To kick things off, I want to go right back to the beginning. The Panasonic Lumix GH4. This was my first Micro Four Thirds purchase, a 16 megapixel still camera. Had so many features crammed into it, I'm surprised it wasn't bursting at the seams. It was the first camera to do 10-bit 422 out to an external recorder, and it's just an all-around beast of a camera in every way. Now, this GH4 went into semi-retirement after getting hit by a rogue wave at the Santa Monica Pier. I had a pretty epic day of photography leading up to it. I performed some emergency surgery on it and ended up fixing the broken LCD screen. And while I had it open, I may have removed the sensor. While I had the sensor out, I took all the filters off it, converting it into an infrared camera, which can do some pretty surreal things, and it makes some gorgeous black and white imagery. And also, if you apply some filters to the camera, you can do some pretty amazing stuff. All right, moving on. Up next, we have the 12 to 35 f2.8 and the 35 to 100 f2.8. And they are what I consider to be the perfect combination of lenses that almost everyone should start with, whether you're a photographer or a filmmaker. This is your your staple, your bread and your butter right here. The 12 to 35 f2.8 is sharp. light, weather sealed, and excels at both photo and video. It is excellent on a gimbal or handheld thanks to its image stabilization, and paired with the IBIS in the Panasonic bodies, it is a killer combination. The 35 to 100 is every bit as good. It is absolutely criminal how underutilized this lens was in my possession. I did shoot that big pano with it that I showed you at the beginning, and I used it for some interview stuff as a B-cam lens. But for how sharp it is, for how nice the bokeh is, just for how compact it is, it doesn't even trombone when you zoom. It's weather sealed. Just an all-around amazing performer. You cannot go wrong with this lens. I have to admit that I absolutely hated this purplish blue metallic color when I first got these lenses, but now that I'm selling them, I'm going to be very sad to see them go, give some personality, and I'm going to miss that about them. There is a new Mark II version. They're black. It's pretty much the only update. I think the IS is ever so slightly updated as well to work with the IBIS in the GH5 and the GH5 II and so on. So minor update, but you know, probably worth it, and you could probably save a lot of money buying this older version as well. Now, the next lens I think that everyone should have in their bag, kind of a staple lens for both photographers and videographers, is the Leica 25mm f1.4. I use this lens on every single video production I do. It's the talking head lens. It's your interview lens, and you shoot from roughly the sternum up. You get a blurry enough background, enough bokeh to make it look nice, and then you can crop into close-ups if you're editing in a 1080p timeline. Throw your B-roll over it that you shoot with the 12 to 35, and Bob's your uncle. You're done. Now, I will admit that I did not see the Leica magic that a lot of people claim this lens has. I mean, it's a really solid lens. It's wonderful performer, but it didn't have that extra something that some people claim it does. It might just be my copy. There's also an f1.7 Lumix 25mm lens, and I think if you're on a budget, get the 1.7. Don't even hesitate. It's a well-regarded lens. It's sharp, it's good in low light, it's going to be much more bang for the buck. But if you want to know that you have the best 25mm that Panasonic makes, then the Summilux f1.4 is the way to go. And there is also a new version of this, all black, weather sealed, and metallic body. So again, maybe you'll save a few bucks buying this older used version, and yeah, best of both worlds perhaps. Now, let's move on. Past go, don't collect 200 bucks, no detours. We're going straight to the best of the best. The legendary, mythical, outrageously priced Leica 42.5mm Nocticron f1.2 lens. This is your portrait photographer's lens. Beautifully built like a tank, all metal construction, manual aperture ring, in-body stabilization, autofocus and manual focus switch. It's a really beautiful lens. Now, I'll tell you right now that this lens absolutely does have that magic Leica look. It's the micro contrast that gives it a 3D look. It's extremely sharp, extremely beautiful. You can crop shots on this lens and it just holds that sharpness all the way in. Most lenses will not do that. That's how you know that you have one of the very special lenses on whatever system you shoot. When you can crop in on someone's eye and see your reflection as a photographer in the pupil, that's when you found your portrait lens. I barely used it for video because the focal length is a little bit long for that sort of thing, but when I did use it, same thing as photo. Beautiful contrast, razor sharp, wonderful out of focus areas. There is a 1.7 42.5 lens, and it is great bang for the buck. I think you'll save a lot of money by buying that one. This lens is for whoever wants the absolute best that Micro Four Thirds has to offer. If you want the best, I mean, if you shoot portraits of people, if people pay you to shoot their portrait, buy this lens, don't look back, this is the one, that's it. Okay, let's move on. I think we've done 2 Leica lenses in a row, so let's switch things up. And we are gonna go with the 100 to 300mm telephoto zoom lens. I picked this up for travel. It was pretty cheap. light, and has decent quality. It also comes with image stabilization, although it is the older Mega OIS variety, but it's still very effective on handheld telephoto shots. Yeah, so this is basically your budget wildlife and perhaps maybe secondary travel lens. 67mm filter thread. So for a telephoto this big, I think that's good. I mean, personally, I have this rule, and I don't like micro 4/3 lenses that are bigger than 67mm. I think it kind of defeats the purpose of a compact system like this. So 67 is great for a lens this big. All my filters are 67. None of my other lenses are this big, and it makes a lot of sense. Now, do I recommend this lens? No, I don't recommend this lens. I think that you would be better served by the Leica 100 to 400mm, extra 100mm on the long end. It's a faster lens, better in low light, and you need that shutter speed when you're shooting animals. The other thing is it's all metal construction, tripod collar, better IS, weather sealing, the list goes on and on and on, and the price goes up and up and up as well, but you can find them used for a pretty good deal nowadays. This lens is an older design, it has that older IS, it's plastic, it's cheap. If you shoot telephoto stuff, animals and birds, and you're on micro 4/3, do yourself the favor, get the Leica, save, wait, get your tax return, Christmas, whatever. Way better lens. Let's switch things up a little bit and take a body break.
Body break.
Break.
Now, who remembers Hal Johnson and Joanne McLeod? I do, because I'm old, and if you don't know them, maybe you're too young, or maybe it was a Canadian thing. I'm not too sure, let me know. This is the GX8, and this is my all-time favorite camera. I got this camera body in exchange for some work I did for Panasonic Lumix, and I asked them for this instead of money. They were the sponsor of the photo pit of an air show, so I shot a bunch of photos and video for them. This was the first MFT camera with a 20 megapixel sensor, and it has this beautiful, stylish rangefinder inspired design to it. This is my go-to travel camera, and I have made some awesome pictures all over the world with this camera. Articulating LCD, articulating EVF, rangefinder stylings. It looks super cool, slung across your hipster outfit wherever you may be. All around great camera. It performs really well as a B camera as well for shooting interviews. You can shoot video in 4K with it. I would love a Mark II of this, a GX8 Mark II, GX10, whatever you decide to call it, Panasonic, do it please. Pack in a bunch more megapixels. Take out the anti-aliasing filter and basically keep it the same as this. Keep the tiltable EVF, keep the rangefinder design, keep the two-tone. I would do brass on top, or at least do a limited edition version with brass that can wear through and show that patina. And I think you would have a hit on your hands. I would have stayed with micro 4/3 if there was a higher res body coming out, or even rumored to be coming out. I need more resolution. I'm doing some really big prints for clients nowadays, so I needed to step up to a larger format. But I love this camera so much that if you had released a modern version of it, I would stick with the format. And I know a lot of other people want the same thing. They want the GX8 Mark II. I mean, you're leaving money on the table by not doing it, so free advice from me to you is go ahead and make that. Now let's take a look at two travel zooms that I bought to go with this camera. The first is the 12 to 32mm. This is a kit lens. I went out of my way to find a black version with a box because I'm really picky and I want a box with every lens that I buy. It's the only used lens I've ever purchased in my life. And I'm gonna be honest with you, I've shot like 5 photos with this lens. The issue is that I have like 3 or 4 other lenses in this focal range that perform even better. So this lens just never got used. It just ended up sitting on a shelf most of the time. Now the second lens I purchased, a much better lens, is the 14 to 140. This is a travel super zoom. While this lens feels metallic, it's probably some type of composite material, but it does feel pretty well built. Ultra compact, comes with image stabilization, decent enough zoom and focus ring, And it's very reminiscent actually of the 12 to 35 f2.8 lens. It's almost the exact same size, the exact same body when you compare the two of them. 58mm filter thread. And to be perfectly honest with you, it's almost the exact same quality when it comes to photography. And this is by far my most used lens. It's not as exotic or amazing as some of these other lenses, but I have made some of my favorite photos with this lens because it's the lens that I take with me everywhere I go. So in summary, I highly recommend this lens. Excellent travel lens, worth every penny, compact, sharp, just performs beautifully. I love this lens for photography. All right. Let's move on to something perhaps a little more exotic, shall we? Now this is a Lumix G5. Not a GH5, a G5. Quite an old camera at this point. I bought it off eBay, drop shipped it to a company in New Jersey called Kolari Vision, and they modified the sensor for me to shoot in infrared. So this is a 720 nanometer infrared converted camera. That allows me to shoot some pretty amazing surreal images. So if you have an old camera body you're done with, if you're in a rut, you want to try something new with photography, send it off, have it converted, don't do it yourself like I did, and you'll have heaps of fun playing with infrared. There's a lot of cool things you can do. Moving on, let's go to the wide side of things with the Samyang 7.5mm fisheye lens. This is a fully manual lens, meaning manual aperture and manual focus. Now, one of the great things about Micro Four Thirds is focus peaking. So with these older manual lenses and third-party lenses, it's not a problem trying to focus with them. Now, I know a thing or two about fisheye lenses because I started my career filming skateboarding about 20 years ago. So I always feel like I have to have a fisheye lens. Even though I don't film skateboarding anymore, I need the lens just in case the phone rings and I go back in the streets like I used to. One of the cool things about this lens is that it distorts things incredibly, so it gives it a very cool look, very surreal. So this would be great for music videos, action sports, skateboarding, that sort of thing. And I know some people use it for just kind of doing exaggerated architecture. So I used mine on cathedrals in Europe, and I made this really interesting shot of a train with it that I later photoshopped. And that dramatic barrel distortion, I think, gave it the look. You can have so much fun with a fisheye lens. $350 off Amazon, super tiny, doesn't take up much room in the bag, so not a lot of regrets if you don't use it that often, and it's super light. So have some fun, try out a fisheye. I think this third-party Samyang or Rokinon one is probably the one to go with based on the price. It's extremely sharp. It's definitely worth it. Well, we're on to super tiny, laughably, ridiculously small, not that size matters, lenses, is the Laowa 7.5 f2 ultra-wide angle. This lens is also fully manual, meaning fully manual aperture and manual focus. Again, focus peaking is your friend here. Unlike the fisheye lens, you can add filters to this with an adapter. It's a 46mm thread. And this lens is amazingly sharp. Honest confession time. I've only used this lens once. I probably owned it for a year. I've used this lens one single time. And that was in a Japanese garden that I visited, and the lens performed admirably. Better than I expected. It was so sharp, really nice contrast, a beautiful lens. I should have used it more. I moved into a new system. I have a new wide angle lens. Take a look at how amazingly small this thing is on a camera body. It's insane. It's absolutely insane how tiny and light this lens is. You won't even know it's in your bag. It's, I think, a go-to lens if you're traveling, and it'll pair well with that 14 to 140 and maybe something like the 100 to 300. Those three lenses would have an entire focal range covered, and you'd barely even know the stuff's in your bag, so it won't intrude on just enjoying your day. Amazing lens. Now, since we're on the topic of lenses I barely ever use, the 30mm f2.8 macro. I purchased this lens for one reason and one reason only, and that is to digitize my analog film. You can actually see over my shoulder there my film fridge. And this was to put on my GH5 and actually just digitize all that film with. final thoughts on the 30mm macro. Don't buy it. I know that sounds funny to say. I think you'd be better served by the 45mm Leica lens, the 60mm Olympus lens, or even just a set of extension tubes that you can use on one of the lenses you already own. This lens is sharp and it works well, but you have to get so close to your subject that it becomes a bit annoying. I mean, you can get so close that you start casting shadows onto your subject, and then you need to put a ring light in the mix. And I just don't think it's worth it. I would rather have something in a more traditional macro focal length, closer to like 90, 100mm equivalent, even longer, so that you can keep your distance from your subject and not really get all up in its business. So yeah, I would pass on this one, as affordable as it is. And if you're a casual shooter, go with the tubes. If you love macro, you're out there lighting mushrooms in the forest, get probably the 60mm Olympus. Let's be honest, that's the one for you. Now, another lens that I think I didn't use enough is the wonderful, the beautiful, the luxurious 12mm Leica f1.4 lens. Just like the Nocticron, this is a work of art. Beautifully built, just like a tank, solid metal construction, manual aperture ring, beautiful, smooth, gliding focus ring on this one. It does lack image stabilization, but it is a wide angle, so not so needed. I only made one half-ass attempt at astro with this lens. I was on vacation, I looked out the window when I was going to the bathroom in the middle of the night, I saw the Milky Way, it blew my mind, ran outside, took this shot. Not a very good shot, but I think it does show the potential that you can do astrophotography with this lens. If you're a nighttime astrophotographer, landscape photographer, this is definitely the lens for you. Razor sharp, edge to edge, wide open. And also, if you're a filmmaker, I think it matches up with the other Leica primes very nicely. It gives you a shallow depth of field, nice contrast, nice color saturation, and a similar look throughout your prime, so that you can keep that consistent look on, you know, your A cam, your B cam, or if you're switching between lenses on a shoot. The one thing I will say is that I actually used this lens for all my YouTube videos before this, so it looked somewhat like this. And I think it gave me a pretty good frame and a bit of background separation. Now, I would have preferred a little more background separation, but my office here is pretty tiny, so it's hard to get space either behind me or over here to the camera. So something to consider, but I do think if you're into like vlogging or YouTubing and you're on micro four thirds, I would consider this lens for your sort of talking head portions of your videos, and then maybe something like the 12 to 35 to shoot all your B-roll with, and you'd have a pretty nice setup. So yeah, a luxury of a lens, worth every penny. This is another one that I was given by Panasonic in exchange for some work I did, so I didn't buy it, but it was worth it. I would have bought this lens. It was on my list, and that's why I made the deal. Now I want to wrap things up. I'm saving the best for last. This is the honorable, the venerable, the ultra reliable Swiss Army knife of hybrid cameras. A beast for photo and video. It's the GH5. It's a solid upgrade over the 20 megapixel sensor, 4K 10-bit 422 internal recording, which at the time is just unheard of, and the first camera that was doing 4K 60p. The GH5 introduced us to Vlog-L for the first time, an actual log format for our cameras, and that opened up tons of creative freedom. Gave us a lot more dynamic range and control over the color in our images. Pro tip, go ahead and purchase the GH Alex LUT. In my opinion, it's the best conversion LUT for the GH5. It'll take your Vlog-L, convert it over to ARRI Log-C, and from there you can do a lot of things, and it works wonders for your highlight, roll-off, and just the general color tone of images coming from the GH5. I think that's where I got my most pleasing images, is by using that LUT and that workflow. Shout outs to the GH5, an absolute legend of a camera. Thanks for bearing with me while I ramble on about all this stuff. It's kind of emotional when I leave a camera system, because I've been working with this stuff for 6 years, and I feel like these are all my children, and I just want to say goodbye to them one at a time and kind of just touch them one last time, think about them. I wish I could keep them all, but I'm super creative, not super rich, so I do have to sell some of this stuff off. you know, this really is a love letter to the format. It's been so reliable. It's opened up so many opportunities for me. It's allowed me to have a lot of creative expression and a lot of tools that, you know, when I started out my career, I didn't think would even be possible. If you told me that I'd have stuff this powerful, this small, this affordable early on, I would have thought you were nuts. And it's amazing to see the fruition of this. And the future of Micro Four Thirds is looking pretty bright. We have the GH6 any day. It's supposed to come out before the end of 2021, and here we're about mid-November. So it's coming. It's coming. I can't wait to see what they do with it. Olympus, or should I say OM System, they have a flagship coming as well. So if you're an Olympus shooter, you know, rejoice, because a new camera body is always something to celebrate. Third parties, still making cameras, still making lenses. I think all in all, it's just a wonderful format. So whether you're a Micro Four Thirds shooter or you're thinking about getting into the format, you know, it's a treat. There's nothing like it. It's its own little thing, and it's amazing. All right, thanks for bearing with me, guys, in my farewell to Micro Four Thirds. Until next time, please remember, you can be reactive or you can be creative. It all depends on how you choose to see.